Hello and welcome to Satish Jha show. Something very interesting is happening in Russia. Seems like what Russians think of the status of Putin's thinking kind of is changing. Not long back, we thought Putin was a seasoned, calculating ex KGB chief who couldn't be swayed by small things. Now, no one is able to figure out how he thinks. For the first time in the history of Cold War, post Cold War, and since nuclear weapons became possible, or at least Russia or USSR required nuclear weapons, the level of nuclear deterrence has been escalated. That's an extraordinary event by any standards, and the world doesn't have much information what to base its analysis on, except the mind of Putin. Come to think of it, Putin did not have enough reason to invade Ukraine, not at the level he has done. Escalation to a level of war requires something really serious, and nobody can understand why he would do that other than the fact that he wants to look NATO down in its eyes and tell Ukraine that it just can't behave the way it likes to and ensure that all its former, you can say, provinces that became countries, that they should have a message that they are in the backyards of Russia and they can't get out of Russia's influence because that is important for the security or the strategic national reasons of Russian nation. Now that's a very different calculation. But the fact is, Russia is a huge land mass, 10% of entire world geography. The earth is under Russia as one nation still. Everyone else is, if Russia was an elephant, all other neighboring countries are like rabbits or tortoise or some little antelopes, Ukraine being the largest of them. So if Ukraine could be tamed, others probably won't have any reason to stand up. But nationalism doesn't really work that way, as we have learned from history. So why is Putin behaving this way? Nobody understands. America surely has failed in understanding the reason and the driving forces why Putin is trying to go to this level of madness. It's nothing short of madness. A small country of 40 million people, which is in the backyard of Russia, did not deserve to be treated this way, particularly when they have been functioning as a democracy for quite some time, for at least now 30 years. They have their own challenges. They have their own ethnic aspirations across the regions of Ukraine. Now, Ukraine is a very large landmass next to Russia, bigger than any other European nation, actually, come to think of it. So it has its own aspirations, own challenges, own ethnic conflicts, and eastern part of it wanted to be closer to Russia, western part closer to Eastern European Union. And in that conflict, the place where we stand today is beyond our imagination just some time ago. Post-Cold War, nobody expected escalation of Cold War to this level. America surely did not manage to understand what's happening here other than the invasion will happen, that Putin is planning invasion. Why? And those are all basically guesswork. So as of now, the best case scenario is that this kind of escalation may have been prompted by the lack of readiness to go to war. When nations don't go to war, they develop atrophies. And to get them to kind of jolt, you do something like this so that the military gets jolted. So the net result could be their preparation, rather their readiness could be suddenly brought into more what was expected from them, because the results of Ukraine's invasion have not been to Putin's liking. It wasn't brought to the knees in no time. And Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, a former comedian, has turned out to be a global hero. The whole world is talking about Zelensky as the hero, the next Nobel Peace Laureate, and everything you can imagine in what a hero should be. That's Zelensky. A tiny country compared to the adversary, a David versus Goliath story, and he is standing up like a David. And if he succeeds in thwarting Putin's ambitions, just imagine the stature of Zelensky. But it's not about the stature of Zelensky. It's about how the new rules of engagement of such threats across the globe should be rewritten so that such situations don't arise. Putin has taken a huge risk. He's saying that because NATO and EU and the world are raising, adversarial positions against him in terms of economic sanctions, right now he must be really hurting because his assets outside have been frozen. Banks can't transact. His planes can't fly in Europe. So what has he achieved if so far he's only lost? Now, a mind of a dictator who basically has yes men around him, who hasn't seen much of the global challenges of dealing with the heat of what happens at the marketplace, who hasn't seen the heat of dealing with people as an equal. Now, that person may not be able to, in time, after 20 plus years, almost 25 years, or you can say, considering he was head of KGB for a very long time, almost all of his life, he has been sitting in a position where he was the one, the world unfolded the way he decided in front of him. In that situation, he is more likely to misjudge what the dots, how to connect the dots. And that misjudgment can be expensive for his own nation, for himself, and the world. I think that for the world, the challenge here is how to contain a possible madness erupting into something devastating for the world, how to contain that. For Russians, the challenge is, will this leader take us to a doomsday? And for Putin himself, he obviously doesn't see all that. He only sees, at this point in time, probably he's seething that Ukraine has been able to look him in the eye, stand up to him, and has not basically allowed his forces to, basically run over the country. So the talks are going on in Belarus on the borders. Polish planes carried Ukrainian leaders. But just imagine the joke here is that while Ukrainian defense minister will be negotiating, cultural advisor to Putin is coming for the meeting. Is that a way to soften? Can the cultural advisor negotiate these things? Was it primarily a cultural story? Is it just that Ukraine should listen to Russia, be part of its influence system, and everything is fine? If you see the way things have evolved since Putin's rise in Russia in over 20 years, what he wants is to bring back the Soviet Union, the glory of that time. He has seen some bit of that glory. And obviously people haven't forgiven Gorbachev for letting Russia, or rather USSR, collapse the way it did. But it happened only because the next order leaders, Boris Yeltsin of Russia and the Ukrainian and Georgian presidents at the time, they decided to declare themselves presidents and move in a certain direction. That whole Soviet Union collapsed. There was no reason for it to remain together at some point in time. The sub-nationalities began emerging. So how is Putin going to take care of all that, considering he grew in the Soviet era fantasies? Now the world has changed, and he is not able to live with the new change and wants to go back to the old glory days. That's not going to happen. And that clearly today, Putin is maybe, of course, he's much, much weaker today than he was a week ago. His ability to negotiate is just gone. So his threatening with the escalation of deterrence order of status of nuclear weapons in Russia is not going to change much because people are trying to grapple with the meaning of that. It primarily means greater readiness, like I said before. But what is the game plan? What is the end game in this? So end game is not clear. And much we may know a little more after the negotiations at Belarus between Ukraine and Russia that began this morning, they pan out. And that will decide what will happen. But my sense as of now is that if Putin is making choices entirely on his own as a dictator, we may have escalation which is not good for anyone. If Putin is, for some reason, because of sanctions and the challenges he has finally seen, which can happen, he gets tamed a bit and willing to see reason, probably something moderate may happen. Ukraine will have to give in something. Ukraine cannot just remain the way it was because Putin needs a face-saving device at this point in time. Without some way of, if Putin is pushed to the wall, that's not good for the world. And the lesson of 1962-63 crisis, the Cuban Missile Crisis, that Kennedy's team, the strategic team, basically learned was something along those lines. Give your adversary a little room, little wiggle room. So Putin needs that wiggle room to be able to not make the worst decision. The question is, there are some scenarios. The best scenario is somewhere, basically, UK will have to let go of the one-third or the Russia-oriented Ukraine one way or the other. Something will happen along those lines, and Ukraine becomes a little truncated. That's one. Second, we'll have to agree to some kind of comfort level with Putin. And if Zelensky decides not to move in that direction, there'll be consequences. My sense is Zelensky did not anticipate the kind of challenges which he is now facing. Zelensky also was clearly not a statesman who couldn't foresee a lot of things. He's a leader. He's a great leader. He's proved himself to be a great leader. But a great leader doesn't have to be necessarily strategic. So Zelensky doesn't come across as a very strategic leader here. But what has happened is his first job was to keep peace. If it meant keeping Russia in good humor, that's part of the job that comes with the territory. That's where he did not succeed. I'm not saying he failed. That's where he did not succeed. Whether he tried, whether he did not try, I don't know. But the fact is that he did not succeed in keeping Russia in good humor. That was his first order of work, given the potential threat that existed. And of course, he was egged on by, or Ukraine rather was egged on by NATO. NATO is a very, very serious culprit in this whole story of giving a hope that they will accept him with the NATO system and not being able to deliver on that. Because had Ukraine been a NATO member, US and NATO had to come to Ukraine's defense on the ground, on the air, everywhere. That would be world war. In a way, thank God it's not so. In other ways, had that been the case, probably Russia won't have moved the way it did. So there are very scenarios. And by the way, scenarios of war and peace, you have to see all kinds of games being played here, how people see, how people plot. Because once you give it to the generals, they go about it a very different way. You have to keep it escalated to a level above the generals. Keep the journalists ready, but don't let them make decisions, and keep that at a level which is one level higher, or the leadership, the nation level. So luckily at this point in time, what I see is that Putin is ordering in some ways, and he is controlling it, and he is working on his threat perceptions of what's going to happen. But whatever he has done so far has basically taken the edge out of his charisma or the power or whatever he had. Today, he's a much weaker man. Russia is a much weaker nation today than it was just a few days ago. So while as of now, there is no question of a nuclear war coming out, but that depends on how anyone moves in which direction. And all these players are primarily the same. Now, European Union has become one more player because they are sending some armaments. For the first time, Europe has sent armaments to a nation at war. There'll be other countries that will send some relief, etc. Probably India is also going to send some relief. All that is fine. But all that doesn't change the fact that the question here is much more than relief. The question here is how to avert the bigger war. Because right now we have just seen the skirmishes, which are the portents of something very big that could happen. We all have to pray it doesn't happen, but more than pray, we have to impress upon everyone that war is not something we need at this point in time in human evolution. War was when we did not understand each other. The communication was not at the level we have today. Possibilities were not at the level today. When only geography could make things happen. Today you don't need all that. Today you can be a great nation without having a huge amount of geography. And that's a mindset that Russia may have to get out of. But Russia will learn its own lessons. We can't preach Russia, or anyone for that matter, in that sense. They will all have to learn their own lessons. All we can do is try to keep everyone from making bigger mistakes. And I hope the world works in that direction. With that, I take your leave until the next episode. Thank you very much.